Welcome to Change Cycle, the podcast exploring the shift to a circular economy. Join host Christine Yeager as she dives into sustainable business actions with leading experts and confronts the discomfort that comes with change. Discover how change is at the center of optimizing recycling and creating a regenerative future. Tune into Change Cycle and be part of the solution.
Welcome back to Change Cycle. I'm your host, Christine Yeager, and this is the podcast exploring how we can optimize the shift to the circular economy by embracing change and the fact that change is cyclical. Today, we're unpacking a core tension at the heart of this transition, the balancing act between people, planet, and profit. Many people refer to it as the three-legged stool. Driving sustainable change is crucial, but making it work in the real world means navigating these trade-offs. Some of this can be inspiring, and other parts of it can be uncomfortable. So for all episodes, I like to have a vocabulary check, or just to remind people what some of the words are that we might cover in this podcast, because not everybody wakes up every day thinking about the circular economy. So a couple of vocabulary words we'll talk about in this session to set the stage is the circular economy. This is a system where materials are kept in use for as long as possible through reuse, repair, refurbishment, and most frequently thought of as recycling. And this ultimately is about minimizing waste and regenerating natural systems, with a heavy emphasis on this idea of economy. So thinking about the financial incentives tied to reuse, repair, refurbishment, and recycling. Another vocabulary word we'll talk about is this concept of the triple bottom line, or people, planet, and profit. This is a business framework that expands success metrics beyond profit to include social and environmental performance. And this is something that B Corps talk about a lot, or B corporations, benefit corporations. And benefit corporations is a concept, instead of a C Corp or a corporation, you would be a B Corp, where you define your stakeholders broader than fiduciary responsibility to the stakeholders to drive profit, but in fact, a fiduciary responsibility that includes this triple bottom line. Now, there's also B Corp certification, which may come with being a true legal definition of a B Corp, but it can also come from meeting a lot of very rigorous metrics and showing improvement over time across aspects that are measured as defining people, planet, and profit improvements. So anyway, that's a whole another aspect. And then you have externalities. And this is the hidden costs or benefits of a business decision that aren't reflected in market prices, like carbon emission or landfill waste. So these are some of the vocabulary words that we might come across in this episode. I'm going to start with people, because a circular economy must work for everyone, not just those already equipped to engage. Also, I think that companies often start with profit, which is kind of the antithesis of what we're trying to talk about here. So I'm going to end with profit here in this discussion. So people comes through in different ways, but often with this lens of equity, and equity in access, equity in the right to provide your input, and then social equity in the concept of not furthering the divide between the haves and the have-nots. So one aspect tied to the circular economy is equity and access to services like recycling or the right to repair something. In Colorado's packaging EPR plan, there's a requirement to serve communities regardless of income, language, or housing type, and to prefer service providers with strong labor protections. So it's baked into the concept of the program plan and the actions that are going to be taken in the name of the circular economy in Colorado through the extended producer responsibility, or EPR legislation. One of the reasons I want to talk about this is because it is true that generally lower income communities are hit harder by sustainability challenges or environmental challenges, or access to recycling directly. So why is that? This can happen because there's a higher waste burden and disposal costs potentially in those communities, as well as smaller municipal budgets. So there's limited access to curbside or convenient drop-off recycling in general in lower income communities. And this often forces residents to dispose of recyclable items as trash because they don't have access or an option. This increases landfill use and then raises municipal solid waste disposal costs, which are often passed on to residents through utility bills or local taxes. Disproportionately, this affects those least able to pay. And then smaller municipal budgets exist because local governments in lower income areas collect less revenue from property taxes, sales taxes, or utility fees. It's the nature of the fact that it's a lower income community, which are primary funding sources, and these are primary funding sources for public services like waste and recycling. And so with these constrained budgets, recycling is often deprioritized in favor of more immediate needs like public safety. Fair enough, right? Roads, education, these are all very important aspects. And so obviously recycling comes behind all of this. Another reason lower income communities can be hit harder by environmental challenges is this concept of environmental and health inequity. Communities without recycling access often live near landfills, they're near incinerators, they're near illegal dumping sites, they're near petroleum facilities, so therefore they have a higher exposure to air and water pollution. And these areas, often deemed environmental justice communities, bear the brunt of pollution-related health impacts such as asthma, cancer, there's the term Cancer Alley in Louisiana, and other chronic diseases. This also can hit lower income communities harder because they have fewer economic opportunities. Recycling programs can create local green jobs in collection, sorting, and processing. But with a lack of such infrastructure, it means that there's fewer employment opportunities in these communities. And then investment in recycling infrastructure often bypasses rural or low-income urban areas because it's harder, it's more distributed, it's harder to provide that access through a hub and spoke business model, because the spoke is too far. So this perpetuates cycles of disinvestment and underdevelopment. And then can all be continued and perpetuated through systemic underrepresentation. These communities are less likely to be engaged in policy making or consultation processes that shape recycling systems, like what's collected, how services are delivered, things like that. And as a result, recycling systems are often designed without their input, failing to meet their logistical, cultural, or language needs. So what does prioritizing people look like in practice? How can this be successful? What can it look like through a business? One company doing this well is Cotopaxi. They are a certified B Corp. They embed equity in their supply chain. Their Del Dia product line is made from remnant fabrics, reducing waste while giving their factory workers creative control to design unique items. They've built a model that celebrates both sustainability and worker dignity. Another leader, always on the forefront, is Patagonia, whose worn wear and repair initiatives preserve product value while supporting fair labor and worker rights across their global supply chain. And then another one, and it is called Interface, a flooring company. They've pioneered programs that clean up oceans while supporting coastal communities through programs like networks, sourcing nylon from discarded fishing nets. So circular systems must avoid replicating structural inequities. It's not just about greening operations, it's about including and uplifting the people doing the work and those most impacted in order to successfully meet the people leg of the three-legged stool. Next is planet. This is often the topic here related to sustainability and the circular economy, but let's dig into this a little bit more. So the circular economy aims to be regenerative, eliminating waste and decoupling growth from resource extraction. In theory, it's a net win, but in practice, not all of these solutions are created equal. So you can even have sort of a circular economy idea, but it really is best in class if it regenerates, meaning you put back more than you take out, as opposed to just cycling through maybe once or twice. And a lot of times there's a lot of detriment in the circular economy. So paper, for example, there's a paper is a fiber. It has a certain length to it. And every time you recycle it, the length of that fiber gets shorter and shorter. So at a certain point, the fiber is physically too short to recycle again. So there's a bit of detriment that's happening to the structural integrity of the material throughout the process. But in an ideal world, you're regenerating more than you take. But this can also be a huge challenge in the circular economy because perhaps there's a byproduct that happens in that process. So there's this woman who eloquently talked about unzipping polymers and re-zipping them back together to create new polymers, and that is a way to reuse this material that you've already pulled out of the earth and put it back into a new use indefinitely. So that is an elegant way to describe chemical recycling. However, there's a lot of criticisms and there's a lot of challenges that come with chemical recycling because of the byproducts that might happen through that unzipping and rezipping process. So you have to consider these trade-offs. And the planet is often deprioritized over profits for reasons that may seem obvious, but let's spend a minute sort of trying to break this down. And I fundamentally do not believe that all businesses are trying to do an evil thing by deprioritizing the planet. They face some very real challenges and misalignment in making that choice. So one is short-term financial pressures. This is very true for all publicly traded companies that are not B Corps. They have a financial fiduciary responsibility to a shareholder to make the decision for the business that drives the highest profit. They can be put in jail if they are proven to not be making that choice, right? So that is a very real structural barrier to publicly traded companies in having a short-term financial success. They're under constant pressure to meet quarterly earning expectations and sustainability initiatives, which often require upfront investment and deliver returns over a long period of time, can seem like a financial risk in that short-term context. As I've said before, if it were easy, someone would have already done it, right? There's another aspect that is sort of blocking companies from choosing to prioritize planet over profit, which is misaligned incentives. Bonus structures, key performance indicators, performance reviews, they rarely include environmental metrics. Now, when I was leaving the Coca-Cola company, they had put some environmental metrics into the metrics that determined the bonus of the senior leadership. And that was a huge win. But not every company has made that change. If executives are rewarded solely for cost savings and sales growth, then those goals will always take precedence over sustainability, even when the company might be talking publicly about something else. Complex supply chains. Many companies don't fully control their supply chain, and this creates barriers to transparency and accountability, especially in industries like fashion, electronics, or packaged goods. They may be 3 or 4 times down the supply chain, so they don't know what their supplier is doing. And if you're a small business getting off the ground, wanting to have that transparency and accountability through your supply chain, it can be a barrier to entry because you don't have enough buying power to push for that level of transparency potentially. If you are a larger company, you might have a lot of structural legacy agreements and systems and like lack of data and information for you to actually see and have the transparency yourself, let alone talk about it publicly. These complex supply chains can potentially mask what is actually happening further upstream in the supply chain because there's no visibility to it. And so a company may not be able to influence, or it just makes it tough. And then you have to upend your profits to the detriment of growth, which means your business may not be in business anymore if you don't continue with the current cost of goods sold that you have. And so it becomes a trade-off of being in business or not, which when people's livelihoods are on the line, it can make it very difficult to choose the planet over continuing to stay in business. And then there's a lack of regulatory mandates. Without strong environmental regulations like extended producer responsibility or carbon pricing, there's little legal incentive to change. And this is why so many in the sustainability community have leaned on pushing for regulatory changes over the years. Is because it is a very effective way to rebalance the incentives for a business. In many regions, polluting or using virgin resources is still cheaper than circular or sustainable alternatives. And that's where regulation can work to reset the market, as it does for many other things like corn or many of these crops like corn and soy that receive subsidies to continue their business. That changes the starting line for the market. So what companies are prioritizing the planet well, not to be all doom and gloom over here of all the roadblocks, because there are companies that are figuring it out. You might be surprised that I'm going to say IKEA. They take their commitment to becoming fully circular by 2030 very seriously. And this includes refill options, modular design, and large-scale investments in responsible end markets. They're also switching their materials out to get rid of formaldehyde and things like that. And they're not just switching those materials, they're rethinking the systems and how they operate to make conscious choice to prioritize the planet, as well as understand that that's something their consumers are. There's also Allbirds, who labels each product with its carbon footprint and uses regenerative materials like eucalyptus and sugarcane. And their transparency shows that not all sustainability claims are fluff. Some are measurable, trackable, and improving over time. And this is not an advertisement for Cotopaxi, but they get a second mention here. Their use of remnant materials diverts textile waste from landfills and eliminates the need for virgin inputs. They don't just talk about the planet, they design around its limits, and that's embedded in the core value proposition of the brand. Of course, technologies like chemical recycling complicate things. While they can produce post-consumer recycled materials, their energy use and emissions vary. And the debate in policy circles is whether these qualify as responsible end markets or not. For textiles, chemical and mechanical recycling show promise, but hurdles like blended fabrics and contamination reduce their current impact. So at the end of the day, Planet Positive isn't about new technology alone. It's about ensuring every solution truly reduces harm and conserves resources. Let's move on to the final P, profit. In the circular economy, money does still matter. It's got it in the title, economy. It's kind of the beauty of the circular economy is thinking about how to rethink profit in the service of driving circularity, or rethinking incentives and shifting the incentives in general. So money does still matter. And extended producer responsibility, that's the heart of extended producer responsibility, is shifting the incentives and shifting the cost of recycling from taxpayers to producers, encouraging better design and infrastructure investment. I held profit for last because, as I said, companies often put it first. In the spirit of pushing for change, what if we thought about profit as a result of prioritizing people on the planet? The consumer data out there says that a lot of people prioritize people and the planet fundamentally, and they sometimes see it as like a status symbol for themselves, as like, look, I'm choosing a brand that is doing good for the environment, and so it makes me have a better status. And this is true in many generations, and very true in younger generations. And as an anecdote of my experience in this realm, I had the privilege of participating in what they called the junior board for the Girl Scouts of Greater Atlanta. So we weren't like the board of directors or whatever for the nonprofit, but we were sort of an advisory board to help with some very specific areas that they wanted us to support. Through this opportunity, I got the chance to volunteer in different ways. And one of the ways I volunteered was participating in something they had called Camp CEO. And this is where Girl Scouts in the Greater Atlanta area earn the opportunity to go to this camp. And it's a leadership development camp, and they offer a weekend of mentorship and career exploration for high school girls. And I was the least impressive person there. These girls were unreal. They were so impressive, inspirational, all of the things. We did a vision board, and their vision boards were like gave me goosebumps. They were so inspirational. And largely because they'd already accomplished a lot. Many of them had already started nonprofits in service of the things that they wanted to see change in the world. And in an inexperienced eye, you might see that it looked like they had cliques, but we sort of structured some of the activities so that they were forced to maybe work with somebody at a different table. And they didn't skip a beat. It didn't matter to them at all. They were so supportive of each other, helping each other, making space for the other person to talk, no matter how different they were. I left that opportunity full of hope for our future. Because if these are the women that are going to lead us into the next however many years, we are in a good spot. So beyond these incredible future leaders, what companies are considering profit in conjunction with people and planet? Companies like Unilever are making this work by investing in reuse and refill pilots. While the returns aren't always immediate, they're building long-term brand value and resilience. On the flip side, a competitor of Unilever, small competitor, Blue Land Cleaning Products, is creating cleaning products that don't have waste. It's a B Corp that reimagines household cleaning products to eliminate single-use plastic. Their business model centers on selling refillable bottles and dissolving cleaning tablets, reducing packaging waste and shipping emissions dramatically. Despite being a relatively small company, Blue Land has scaled quickly, winning investments from Shark Tank and securing shelf space in retailers like Target. Their cost-saving refill model builds brand loyalty and increases profit margins over time, while driving a significant environmental impact. Blue Land proves that circular design doesn't have to come at the expense of growth. Their smart packaging and refillable systems tap into consumer value and create a routine that the consumer continues to participate in. And that also delivers recurring value and recurring revenue for the consumer and the planet. Profit is harder to reconcile in sectors like textiles, though. The economics of textile to textile recycling are tough. Blended fibers, contamination, and a lack of infrastructure all raise costs. Meanwhile, low material value and unstructured markets lead to inefficiencies and sometimes questionable practices where entities get paid multiple times without driving real system change. Still, businesses like Cisco are showing that circularity can align with profit, especially when modular product design reduces waste and makes refurbishment and resale viable. So companies are creating ways to kind of lengthen the time that you can use something by creating these modular solutions. So if one piece of it breaks, you only have to replace the one piece, as opposed to like sometimes iPhones that it's hard to replace the thing. And this all can be wrapped up in, you may have heard legislation out there in this idea of right to repair. Profit doesn't need to oppose sustainability, but we must ensure financial mechanisms actually drive systemic improvement, not just shifting the cost. Finding the balance. I know this is a very EPR heavy podcast, and is because it's very relevant right now. It's growing a lot. There's a lot of deadlines associated with it that companies are having to align to. So I am going to bring in the Circular Action Alliance as an example. They are a nonprofit who are the selected producer responsibility organization implementing packaging EPR across several states, as I've mentioned before. And their plans provide commentary and action plans against planet, people, and profit. So for planet, they have eco-modulation incentives for using recycled content above and beyond the market, designing, and then also for designing for reuse and investing in infrastructure that supports closed loop or circular systems. People, they talk about creating multilingual education campaigns, creating or using strong labor practices, prioritizing strong labor practices, and also targeting access to traditionally underserved communities. And then profit. They have a fair and equitable funding system in concept where producers pay for recycling based on their material impact with investment targeting long-term supply chain resilience. So there's this aspect of if you shift to recyclable materials, you're incentivized, and that will reduce your fees over time. So you are incentivized to make these fundamental shifts in your business. It's not perfect, and implementation will reveal where adjustments are needed, but it's one of the most structured attempts to build a circular system that balances impact, equity, and business viability. So at the end of the day, the circular economy isn't just a buzzword, it's a paradigm shift. But real systems change isn't smooth or clean or easy. It's full of trade-offs. And what matters is how we name, navigate, and learn from those trade-offs across people, planet, and profit. Because if we're serious about circularity, we can't treat these dimensions as separate silos. They're deeply interconnected, and achieving balance isn't about perfection. It's about direction, transparency, and willingness to evolve. So why embrace thinking about it from the lens of people, planet, and profit? Fundamentally, I believe that that's the future of business. In fact, I think the future is already here. I think you see it in the long-term success of businesses that do balance those three legs well, and the growing success of companies like B corporations. I think that we are in the middle of the growth curve of shifting to that thinking. And by prioritizing all three Ps, you actually have a more resilient, stronger business that can stick around for the long haul and feel good about what you're doing. Not that it's just about the emotional aspect, but that's why I would embrace a change to prioritize the people, planet, and profit together.
In our next episode, we dive into corporate purpose in action. I sit down with Jeff Sin and Stephen Rockland to discuss their new report, How to Set Sustainability Strategy in 2025, Thriving in an Era of Impact and Backlash. We explore how purpose gets embedded across organizations, why middle management holds more power than you think, and what it really takes to turn ESG ambition into measurable impact.
Thank you for listening to Change Cycle. We hope that today's conversation inspires you to embrace the change that comes with building a world where circularity and social equity power the economy. Visit csyimpact.com to learn more about how you can implement sustainable strategies in your business. That's csyimpact.com. Thanks again, and we look forward to having you join us next time on Change Cycle.